All right, welcome back. You're going to hear a lot about the 3% CPI over the next few weeks for sure. Another thing you're going to hear a lot about is Bidenomics, right? My producer Ashley Googled that term last week. And other than copying the format for the name Reaganomics, it's got a lot to do with what I'd call good old-fashioned babysitting. I mean, at its core, Bidenomics looks a lot like Keynesian economics. Now, without having the red mist of confusion come down over your head, I describe Keynesian economics as the theory that the government should increase demand in order to boost growth in the economy. The key word, government. Not the free market, but government. Because government knows better, don't they? Now, we could go on and on about it, but we knew just the right guy to have come in and talk to us and give it to us straight. Please welcome into the show, Bob Iaccino. Bob, thanks for taking the time. Give it to us straight. I mean, like I said, they copied the idea from Reaganomics, but not the actual policies. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I wore a collared shirt, Scott, because it's a very serious subject here. So I want to actually act like I have some credibility. Bidenomics is a modern version of Keynesian economic theory as started by John Maynard Keynes. And that theory, real quick synopsis of it, was that the federal government should come in and spend money during recessions and then raise taxes during periods of inflation. That's really what it is. So if you have a business cycle that goes like this, the government wants it to go like this. Okay, they're trying to smooth these things out with a general upward trajectory in Keynesian economic theory. There's several problems with it. Number one is it brings about massive inflation risk. You could look at the pandemic itself and some of the stimulus checks as being in some way, shape, or form Keynesian. It wasn't necessarily government spending money, but it was the government handing money over, which is essentially what Keynesian economics says to do through actual jobs created by the government. Speaking of Biden, if you talk about how many jobs he takes credit for, there's a difference between creating jobs and taking credit for jobs that were created. And they're two different things. Bidenomics is actually an inflation pumper. Okay, it pumps up inflation during a time when inflation is exactly what the other side of the coin, the Federal Reserve, is fighting. Number two, one of the problems with Keynesian theory that Biden doesn't seem to know is the crowding out effect. If the government is spending money to create jobs with projects, they're crowding the private sector out, who, number one, does it better, and number two, spends money more efficiently, thereby hiring more people with that same dollar. And then the two biggest ones to me, which you mentioned in the intro, political influence is very rampant in Keynesian economic theory because jobs are handed out to political friends. And the last one, the last negative, is the assumption of rational policymakers. These are actual textbook critiques of Keynesianism. And the assumption of rational policymakers basically says that the people who are going to be doing what you said the government needs to do within Keynesian economic theory have to be rational and have to actually have good intentions and be moral. Show me where that is.
Right. I mean, I'm writing down the Green New Deal as you're speaking because that is not rational. And that is a huge spending of money. And we're not going to really get anything good growth out of that when it comes to the economy. That's a great example. And by the way, that's a huge chunk of money being spent on an idea that is still arguably still debatable, right? And so that's a perfect example of what you mean by you assume that these people know what they're doing and have a brain, but a lot of times they don't, and all that money is just down the tube, and you get no growth out of it.
Well, you can't, I mean, people call economics a science. I call it a philosophy because when something is a science, scientific process is you posit a theory, you test that theory, you run experiments, and then you track results. There's no real way to do that in economics because if you run an economic theory on an economy the size of the US's and it fails, you blow up the economy and you hurt a lot of people. I would argue that's what happened during COVID with the stimulus and the shutting down of small businesses in favor of large businesses. As we ran an economic experiment based somewhat in Keynesian economic theory that has failed miserably. It brought about huge inflation, crushed small business, and lined the pockets of the uber wealthy, thus expanding the wealth gap that same administration complains about. And granted, a lot of it started during Trump. I get a lot of pushback for that. But it was expanded during Biden quite a bit. And the problem, again, is what you said in the intro. That's really the be-all, end-all. If a government is actually going to spend during a recession, Keynesian economic theory says you need to raise taxes during expansion and save that money for the next recession, not always deficit spend. Keynesian theory says you can deficit spend when you need it, but otherwise you're supposed to be saving the surpluses during economic boom times to spend during recession. Zero chance that happens in this particular administration or really in government in general.
Right, and to your idea about created, I mean, those jobs weren't created; they were reinstated. That's why I want to make sure everybody knows. Jobs reinstated, not created. They take credit for it all the time, but no, we're just putting people back into the jobs we kicked them out of when we shut the economy down. And number two, the only thing that I really learned over this Keynesian exercise when it comes to the pandemic and shutting everything down and all the damage that it did was that if I ever want to open up a restaurant, if I don't open up a drive-through, punch me in the face, please, because that's the only way that people survived over that. Those poor people, and guys that had no drive-through were out of business. I mean, come on.
Well, I promise to punch you in the face if you promise not to punch back. But
right.
Essentially what happens with Keynesian economic theory is the biggest part of it is rational actors controlling the system. And that's why it can never work, because we don't have rational and thoughtful policymakers really on either side, but especially here, because right now, Keynesian economic policy says that you should be raising taxes to fight inflation and cutting back spending because we have high inflation. And all they're doing is spending with the desire to raise taxes, borrowing more, and all of it goes to the spending side.
Yes.
None of it comes toward the revenue side, and that's the issue.
Said it perfectly. Thank you very much. Totally agree with you. That was a great lesson. Thank you very much. Bob Iaccino coming to us from